Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we've got some really fascinating material. It's the second book in Michael Celso's series, The Void and Addiction. Hello, darkness, my old friend. Our goal here is, to really get to the heart of it, find the core insight. And what Celso does, it's quite striking, really, is he pushes us beyond seeing addiction as just, bad behavior. Instead, he argues it's the symptom. Addiction is presented as this desperate, almost frantic search for salvation, trying to fill this emptiness inside.
Exactly. And to explore something that deep, the book takes a really robust approach. It's multidisciplinary. So we're talking psychology, neuroscience, but also, importantly, spiritual philosophy is trying to map out these hidden territories of being human, looking for the root cause, not just the obvious signs.
Right. Okay, so let's dig into that. The book talks about the architecture of suffering. How does this inner void actually form, according to Celso? He traces it back to unhealed wounds, often from trauma, leading to what he calls fragmentation, which, if you haven't heard it used like this, basically means the self isn't whole, it's fractured. Like a broken mirror, maybe? Living through different disconnected parts of oneself?
That's a good way to put it. And what's really interesting is how our own minds, our psyche tries to cope with that shattering. The book points heavily to the role of the ego here. The ego steps in with these pretty powerful defense mechanisms, but counterintuitively, their job is often to shield us from confronting that fragmented pain, that darkness inside.
Wow, yeah, that sounds like a constant battle. So what are the main defenses he highlights, the ones keeping the pain buried?
He lays out three key ones: distraction first, then denial, and maybe the trickiest one, self-deception. And these aren't just like simple mistakes. They're complex psychological strategies. If looking into the void is too terrifying, the ego constructs this alternate reality, often involving addictive patterns, to distract you or deny the wound exists or even convince you the pain isn't what you think it is. It's all about containment, keeping that darkness locked away.
Okay, so the ego is busy managing the psychological fallout, but what's the really deep, maybe existential thing it's shielding us from? You mentioned spirituality earlier, and the book talks about a spiritual schism.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
This is where Celso's work gets particularly, I think, unique. He argues the deepest layer of this void is this kind of profound split, a separation between what he terms the soul, our essential core self, and the spirit, which he defines more as the life force animating us. So in this view, addiction isn't just chasing pleasure or avoiding pain. It's this incredibly deep, often unconscious attempt to bridge that gap, a fundamental crisis of interconnection.
That really changes the picture for recovery, doesn't it? If the core issue is this deep fragmentation and spiritual split, then just say stopping the substance. Well, that can't be enough on its own.
Absolutely not. It addresses the symptom, but not the underlying condition. Celso's quite clear. The real path forward involves what he calls the true reintegration of the self. And that journey means you have to go through those ego defenses, actually confront the darkness they were built to hide. It requires facing that raw core pain.
So thinking about what this means for you listening, Celso completely reframes recovery. It's not just about quitting something. It's presented as this demanding but ultimately necessary journey of self-reclamation, taking deep academic insights and applying them to this very human struggle for wholeness. So to sum up where we've gotten, we've traced addiction from being seen as just a behavior, back to this idea of a fundamental fragmentation of the soul, which is then fiercely guarded by our own ego defenses. It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It really is. And maybe the most provocative idea to leave you with, something the book really emphasizes, is this, that the darkness itself, the void, isn't just an absence of health or something to be eliminated. It actually becomes the teacher. It's the necessary space, the very crucible where profound healing reintegration have to happen, which leads to a challenging question for you, perhaps. If the void is potentially the space for healing, what unhealed space in your own
Challenging, but really essential terrain. The root causes of addiction. We're looking specifically at how Michael Celso frames it in his series, The Void in Addiction. Today, Book 2, Hello Darkness, My Old Friend.
Right. And it's a framework that really shifts the perspective.
It really does. The moment you start reading these sources, the whole conversation changes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about addiction as, a character flaw or poor choices.
No, not at all. It's presented as this complex symptom, almost a desperate response to a profound internal emptiness, what Celso actually calls the void.
This void, often created by trauma. Yeah. And unmet needs, maybe societal pressures too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Trauma, unmet needs, relentless pressure. And Celso's background is well, quite relevant here. He spent decades in the high-performance equestrian world.
High pressure, definitely.
Extremely. And he observed firsthand how denial and pretty powerful self-deception become these key defenses. Mechanisms that, yes, help maintain performance in sport. But are mirrored almost exactly in how addiction functions. It's the same architecture, in a way.
The architecture of suffering. Okay,
Yeah.
Let's unpack that. How exactly do these sources describe this void? What's the underlying damage?
Well, the void is essentially the space left by unhealed wounds. Celso uses the term fragmentation.
Fragmentation means
It's the breaking apart of the self, the essential self, into sort of manageable pieces after a significant trauma. The self shatters, basically.
an addiction comes in then.
Addiction steps into that fractured space. It tries to be this sort of clumsy, ultimately destructive glue, an attempt to make the person feel whole again.
Wow.
So it's both the symptom of the fragmentation and this deeply flawed search for, well, salvation, internal salvation.
That framing, addiction as a search for salvation, that really changes things. So if the void is from these wounds, how does the book map out the defenses, the things that keep those fragments apart?
Right. So Celso highlights three main areas of disconnection that form this internal architecture. First, obviously, the echoes of the trauma itself, creating that initial break, the fragmentation.
I hear the initial trauma.
Second, the ego's defenses. Things like distraction, outright denial, pervasive self-deception, they all kick in.
To protect from the pain.
Yes, partly. But crucially, the ego isn't just shielding against the original pain. It's actively preventing the fragmented parts from communicating, from reintegrating. It keeps the void dominant.
I see. So the ego effectively becomes the enforcer of the void.
You could put it that way, yeah.
Okay, but what about the third point you mentioned, the spiritual schism? That sounds significant, maybe a bit abstract. How does Celso make that concrete?
It sounds abstract, but the book uses spiritual schism to describe what Celso sees as the deepest fracture. It's the gulf that opens up between the ego, the part of us acting, performing, dealing with the world.
Right, the doing self.
And the soul. The deeper, more authentic, perhaps purpose-driven self. That disconnect, that schism, leaves a person feeling fundamentally misaligned, always searching outside for meaning or validation because that internal connection is broken or damaged.
Okay, that makes sense. So if the root problem is this fragmentation and disconnection, then recovery, it has to be about more than just stopping the behavior, right? It must be about radical reintegration.
Absolutely. That's the core implication. This framework shifts the whole goal of recovery. It becomes a journey of self-reclamation.
Moving beyond just managing symptoms.
Exactly. Moving towards the necessary confrontation required to reclaim wholeness, purpose. It's about bringing back those parts of the self that trauma forced into hiding, reintegrating them.
And the key idea, the sort of aha moment the book seems to push for, is that confronting this internal darkness isn't something to avoid. It's actually the starting point.
Precisely. The darkness itself becomes the teacher. That's where true healing can actually begin.
So to bring this together for you listening, addiction, when you look at it through this kind of compassionate, holistic lens, it's fundamentally a search for meaning. But it's a search driven by deep internal fragmentation, which is then fiercely guarded by the ego's defenses.
Yeah. And that leaves us with a final thought, maybe something provocative for you to consider. If addiction is really defined by this fragmentation and the ego's defenses, how might acknowledging that spiritual schism Celso talks about change the way you approach your own personal growth or resilience?
Even outside of severe addiction.
Right. Even outside of that, it suggests that maybe real self-awareness for all of us requires confronting our own hidden architecture of disconnection, whatever that might look like.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really trying to get to the heart of something complex, addiction. What's actually driving it?
Yeah, we're exploring this powerful idea, grounded in a lot of different sources, clinical and psychological, about the void.
The sense of emptiness being the root.
Exactly. Not just brain chemistry, though that's involved, but digging into the psychological and maybe even spiritual feelings of emptiness.
Okay, so where does this void, this emptiness, where does it come from? Because the research suggests it's not like a character flaw.
No, not at all. It seems deeply rooted in past trauma. We're talking about adverse life events, neglect, abuse, maybe significant loss, things that fundamentally shake you.
Right. And the sources talk about a specific mechanism, don't they?
Yeah.
Trauma leading to dissociation.
Precisely. Dissociation is, it's a way the mind protects itself in overwhelming situations, but the side effect, the cost, is often this this soul fragmentation.
Soul fragmentation, that sounds intense.
It is. It means parts of yourself, often the parts carrying difficult emotions or basic needs like feeling safe or loved, they become cut off, inaccessible.
Ah, okay, so you're left feeling incomplete, like you're not quite whole.
Exactly like that, like a collection of separate pieces rather than an integrated self.
Yeah.
And that feeling, that sense of missingness, creates this constant underlying drive.
The drive to feel complete again. Makes sense.
Right. And faced with that emptiness, which can feel terrifying, the ego steps in, sort of like a manager trying to keep things under control.
And how does it do that? What are its strategies?
Well, the main tactics seem to be denial and distraction. Denial is pretty straightforward, just refusing to acknowledge the void, the pain. I'm fine.
Pretending it's not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when that doesn't quite work or isn't enough, the ego floods the system with noise, distraction.
Okay, like what kind of distractions are we talking about?
Oh, it can be anything, really. Keeping incredibly busy, constant social media scrolling, needing external validation all the time, maybe pouring everything into work.
Trying to get self-worth from the outside because it feels missing inside.
You got it. And here's the really tricky part, the paradox. The addiction itself often becomes one of these strategies.
How so?
The ritual of the addictive behavior, it creates this temporary illusion of control. For a moment, it feels like you're managing the anxiety, managing the void.
Ah, even though it's actually digging the hole deeper.
Exactly. It provides predictability in the chaos, which the ego mistakes for control, locking you further into dependency.
Okay, so that illusion keeps the whole thing spinning. Let's trace that cycle.
Yeah.
It starts with that feeling, right? The void, the incompleteness.
Yeah, that initial ache, sometimes subtle, sometimes overwhelming.
Then that ache turns into craving.
Craving and anticipation, yeah. The mind starts, rewriting history a bit, remembering the relief the addiction brought, conveniently forgetting or minimizing the downsides, rationalizing.
Building the case for why this time it'll be okay or why you need it.
Right. Which leads directly to the next step, use or engagement, giving in.
And that brings the relief.
Fleetingly, yes. Chemically, psychologically, there's a temporary sense of okayness, maybe even wholeness. It works just long enough to reinforce the pattern.
But it doesn't last.
Never does. And that leads to the crash, the consequence phase. The void comes rushing back, but it's worse now.
Worse how?
Because now it's layered with all the negative feelings from the addictive act itself, the guilt, the shame, the self-loathing.
Oh, wow. So the attempt to escape the void actually makes it deeper and more painful.
Precisely. And those feelings, the guilt, the shame, they become powerful triggers themselves.
Starting the cycle all over again.
Exactly. It's like a self-devouring loop. Trying to escape the pain just generates more pain, which fuels the need to escape again.
So looking at it this way, it really shifts the focus. It's less about judging addiction as a moral failing.
And more about understanding it as a kind of learned, deep-seated adaptation, a really misguided, destructive attempt to cope with profound internal pain and separation that often started with trauma.
That really reframes things. It suggests healing isn't just about stopping a behavior, but addressing that underlying fragmentation.
Right. Which leads to a pretty profound thought, doesn't it? What if healing isn't about trying to fill the void with something else, another relationship, another achievement, another distraction?
Okay.
What if the real work is about transforming the void itself, reclaiming that empty space?
Turning it from a place of lack into what?
Into a space for integration, for growth, for finally bringing those fragmented parts back together and building a genuinely whole, vibrant self, reclaiming the absence, not just papering over it. Welcome back to the deep dive. Okay, so you've brought us some really interesting sources today, all centered on this concept of the void in addiction. Our mission really is to unpack that why addiction is, well, just so pervasive and maybe get past some of the misunderstandings that are still out there.
Absolutely. And I think the first thing we have to do is broaden the definition. If you're just thinking alcohol, opioids, that's only part of the picture now.
Right.
We're seeing so much more behavioral stuff, compulsions like gambling, online gaming, even shopping, or endless social media scrolling.
So different behaviors, but the sources suggest they stem from the same place.
Exactly. That's the core idea here. They share this common root, this feeling described as a pervasive void, like an emptiness people are, desperately trying to fill.
Okay, that flips the script a bit. Addiction isn't the main problem then. It's a coping mechanism, a really destructive one, obviously.
Precisely. A maladaptive coping mechanism. It's a sort of short-term, damaging solution for deeper pain.
So what kind of pain are we talking about? What creates this void in the first place, if it's so common?
Well, the sources consistently point to unresolved psychological distress, things like trauma, especially, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. Also profound loss, really deep-seated low self-esteem, and critically important today, social isolation. Or just a lack of meaning, a lack of purpose.
So something like an ACE could make it hard to self-soothe later in life.
Yeah, exactly. It can disrupt secure attachment, emotional regulation, leaving someone without healthy ways to cope. And the addiction offers a temporary escape. It's like self-medication to numb feelings that just feel unbearable.
It makes sense that the relief, even temporary, would be powerful enough to override logic.
Yeah.
Which I guess brings us to the biology, how the brain gets kind of locked in. We have to see it as a chronic brain disease, don't we?
We really do. And the way it happens is, well, it's almost insidious. Addiction essentially hijacks the brain's natural reward system, the dopamine pathway.
Dopamine. Okay. The feel-good chemical.
Right. But think about scale. A natural reward, good food, time with friends, gives you a little dopamine bump. Addictive substances or behaviors, they can cause a flood, way, way higher levels.
And the brain can't just handle that repeated flooding. It has to adapt somehow.
It has to. To try and regain balance, the brain starts shutting down some of its dopamine receptors. It downregulates them.
Okay. And that's tolerance. Needing more just to get the same effect because there are fewer places for the dopamine to land.
You got it. Fewer receptors available.
The consequence seems huge then. Because if the receptors are downregulated, what happens to the pleasure from normal things like enjoying food or hanging out with people?
They become dull, flat, unsatisfying. That's anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure from things that used to be rewarding. The person isn't even necessarily chasing the high anymore.
They're just trying to feel normal or avoid feeling awful.
Pretty much. Just trying to reach a baseline, avoid the discomfort of withdrawal, physically or emotionally.
Which completely dismantles this persistent idea, this myth, that addiction is just a failure of willpower.
Oh, absolutely. It's such a damaging and, frankly, ignorant view when you look at the neuroscience.
Yeah, the sources are clear on this. Addiction leads to actual, measurable changes in the brain, neurobiological adaptations.
We see impairment, structural and functional, in the prefrontal cortex.
The brain's CEO, basically. Decision-making, impulse control.
Exactly. Long-term consequences, weighing options, that whole system gets compromised.
So the compulsion, the craving, it can literally just override rational thought because that part of the brain isn't working properly.
That's the biological trap. So recovery isn't about just trying harder. It's about rewiring those brain pathways. It needs support, intervention, strategies, not just grit.
Okay, so summing this up, addiction is incredibly complex. Biological factors, psychological roots like trauma and that void, social context, it's all intertwined.
Right. And we know genetics play a role, a predisposition.
Yeah.
But the environment is key.
Yeah, that saying, genetics loads the gun, but environment and choices pull the trigger.
It captures it well. Because things like poverty, lack of mental health access, isolation, these environmental factors are definitely pulling the trigger for many people globally.
So building on that final thought then, for you listening, if these environmental factors, ACEs, isolation, systemic issues are major triggers worldwide, what specific societal changes, thinking bigger than just individual treatment, might be most crucial for prevention? How do we reduce that vulnerability on a global scale? Something to think about. Real transformation for reclaiming yourself lies in integrating those wounded parts rather than just trying to silence the ache.
It frames it less as, a simple habit and more like a deep psychological response.
That's right. We're really trying to look beyond the surface behaviors today. The sources often call it this silent ache beneath, an emptiness driving these compulsions.
So our plan is to kind of map out that inner world for you. We want to trace how pain, maybe trauma, creates this hollowness.
And then how the mind, particularly the ego, tries to cope with it, often, unsuccessfully, and explore why this whole thing becomes such a difficult cycle to break.
Right. So let's jump right in. This idea of a deep, pervasive void seems central. The research suggests it stems from these deeper wounds, often trauma. But how exactly does trauma create emptiness?
Well, one key perspective we found looks at trauma as this major disruptor. When things are just unbearable, the mind has this defense mechanism, dissociation, you mentally check out.
All right. Dissociation, like removing yourself from the immediate pain. But what's the long-term effect of doing that?
It can lead to something the material calls soul fragmentation. It sounds dramatic, but think of it like this. Parts of yourself that hold unbearable feelings, pain, fear, shame, sort of break off, detach.
As a way to survive the moment.
Exactly, pure survival. But the result later on is this feeling of being incomplete, fragmented, and that feeling, that sense of missing pieces, that's the void, that gnawing emptiness.
That makes sense. So the emptiness isn't just nothingness. It's an absence of parts of yourself.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you have this internal fragmentation, the ego must sense that as a